So again, my name is Sean, and tonight we're just going to be going over, really the basics of Corel, setting our workspace, going over some of the basic tools, some text questions and features we get a lot, or just errors we might run into, going over a little bit of tracing, and then some of the envelopes, which will help us like shape text and stuff like that too. So, see, it's a lot of you guys' first webinar. And some of the questions coming into I'm working in Corel 2017, as you can see up here. If you're working in different versions, whether it be like X6, 7, 8, 9, or actually that's when it went after 8, it went to I think 2017. Now we're on 18 and 19. So for the most part, they'll be pretty similar. There might be just a little bit different layout or something like that. But for mostly the tools and stuff we're going to use tonight, it's going to be pretty solid through, X6 all the way up to 19. Another question is, I'm thinking of purchasing the software. Will I have any trouble going with Corel 2017? No. So, when it comes to our software, if that's what you're getting the CorelDRAW for, you can honestly go all the way back to X6 at the moment. I probably would, try to go a little bit newer. Just in case like our newest version isn't compatible with 6 or something like that. But 17, as you can see, that's what I'm using here, so that you're not going to run into any issues, stuff like that. Corel comes out with the new version every year, so it's kind of like some of the updates really aren't necessary. But if you're on like a subscription or anything like that, it's worth you can always get the newest. But otherwise, you can, like I said, you can go all the way back to X6. The only thing when you're purchasing CorelDRAW, just make sure it's the full graphic suite. That way, if you get like a teacher or student edition, anything like that, it's not going to be 100% compatible to combine it with our design wizard. All right. So the first thing we're going to go over is just kind of customizing our workspace. So you can see at the top, I have kind of this green bar up the top here. So if you highlight under or over the word tools up top here, and you go to customization, or if you even go to options, it's pretty much going to bring you to the same window. So you can choose any of those first ones there. And there's really not too many features you're really going to have to go through and change in here. But we'll start at the top here where it says appearance. And here you can kind of change the theme, the window bordering, the border, or the size, like the zoom. Now, so up top here, you'll see it's set to 100%. You have this little bar you can slide manually, or you can adjust it by the number here. So you can see when I slid it over, it moved it up to 150%. Now, all around the CorelDRAW, now you can see how all these buttons are zoomed in. If you want your layout like that, that's fine. Keep in mind, some of the tools are going to kind of disappear on you. So you'll have this little double arrow down here at the bottom left. That's going to open up all the tools that we kind of covered when we zoomed in. So if I go back to 100%, you'll notice down here that you'll see a lot more tools on your left-hand toolbar here. Same with up top and on the color palette. So by zooming in, you're not going to be able to see as many of the other features. Now, like I said, if you were to leave it like that, you can just come down to these double arrows and it's going to show you the rest of your tools here. And on your color palettes, you can just scroll down. So you'll still be able to utilize everything. It's just going to zoom in if you want it, if you want a little bit zoomed in for you. So we'll go back to customization, again, appearance, and I'm just going to leave it at 100%. But you can kind of adjust that there to whatever your preference is. Right. And then down here where it says theme, this is, some people prefer it to be a dark background. It might be easier on the eyes. So if you're working around a computer all day, a lot of people in our call center will actually use like the darker themes. It's just, it doesn't hurt the eyes as much. Just because I do so many like webinars and stuff like that, I think it's kind of easier for you guys to see it when it's kind of the screen like that. So I typically leave it on this medium. But, if you have a favorite sports team or anything like that and you want to kind of match it to its colors, you can use this bar here, or this color palette here, and kind of adjust it for any window look there, or window border. So once you find what you like, you can just click out of it, and you'll see how it gives you a window border around all your either pop-ups or your CorelDRAW main screen. And then desktop, I prefer this white, but you can change the desktop color as well. Same way. Again, I would probably either leave it probably black or white, or maybe like a gray. I probably wouldn't use a color, but if you want to set it up, using any color you want, you'll have the ability to do that too. All right, so the next tab would be General. And under that, again, we're not going to change too much. The only thing I typically do is where it says Start a New Document. So every time you open up CorelDRAW, if you don't want to see that welcome screen where then you have to hit, Open New Document, I just skip that and say Start a New Document every time I open up CorelDRAW. So it just goes to a blank canvas where you can start designing right away. So if you wanted to do something different, you can change that in here. But again, there's not going to be too much changes you're going to make in the General tab there. So going down, Display is the next one, and this should be a default setting, but it should say under default action for mouse wheel, we want that to say zoom. So you'll see the other options scroll. So we want that to say zoom, and that's going to allow us to zoom in and out using the wheel on our mouse. So it makes it a lot easier to focus in on certain parts of the design, zoom in and out quickly. And I'll show you how that actually works once we're out of this page. It's a little, once you know how to zoom in and out, it makes it a lot easier, but it can get a little confusing if we don't know the proper way. So I'll show you that as well. So under Edit, you don't really need to change anything here. The next big one is going to be under Save. And this is really important. Corel has a backup file, while you're designing, it has a backup feature. So it's defaulted to every 20 minutes. So we want to change it to default to every 5 minutes. So that way, when we're designing, if for some reason Corel crashes, we close out, or we lose power, anything like that, this backs up our design every 5 minutes and will automatically save it. So you can do a temporary folder, or you can make it go to a specific folder. So if you want to create a folder under your documents, on your desktop, anything like that, it will save all your backup files there. So normally it's set to 20. We like to move it to 5. But again, that's going to be really crucial when we're designing, and maybe we click a feature on the wizard that we're not supposed to, and it might crash Corel. Then it's at least saving up to the last 5 minutes. So that's pretty much, we don't really need to change too much after that. Under Document, if you want to adjust your page size, so that's going to be this little page here. Some people put it 12 by 12, or set it to the width and height of the material they might use the most. So let's say I use easy weed vinyl or glitter, I might set it to 20 inches wide, or 18 inches wide, something like that, just so I can kind of pretend like that's my workspace. But most of it now, it doesn't really matter. We get this question a lot too, does the design have to be inside the workspace? It doesn't have to be. A lot of the older, when we first, I guess maybe 4 or 5 years ago, some of the cutters, in order for it to send from Corel to your cutter, it would have to be inside your workspace. A lot of that doesn't necessarily matter anymore. But we have if you wanted to change it outside of here too, right here on, and I didn't save my settings, so it went back, but right up top here, you'll have your page dimension. So you can manually change that at any time at this point too. It's just by changing it in here, every time you open up that page, it's going to set to that 12 by 12 or 15 by 15, whatever we want to set it to. So that's going to be under document page size. But again, nothing here. You can change it from different inches, millimeters, points, pixels, and stuff like that. Most of the designing that we do is mostly set to, like, we just leave it in inches. I know, like, for our graphic designers that we have in-house, they work in pixels, so it's a little bit different. If you ever receive a file and it might convert to, like, if they saved it in pixels, it might convert to pixels, so you can always change that up top here too. So if someone sends you a file and instead of having like 12 inches by 12 inches, it might say like 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels. You can just change that units right up top here, and it will go back into like inches. So it'll say 12 by 12 instead of 1,000 by 1,000. And then the background here, just where our page is, if you'd like to change the color of that, you can do that in the background area, and that will adjust your color there. So again, most of the times I like to just keep it simple with the white, but if you want to change any of that, you can do that here. But that's pretty much it for the customization, kind of setting up your Corel workspace. But there's a lot of other little features in here, like the nodes and handles. Like if you want to change the node shape or the color or anything like that, you have the ability to do all that. It's just you know, it's there if you want to, but it's kind of, you know, it's not going to make a big difference. So we kind of don't really mess with it too much, but you have the ability to kind of go through there, customize your commands and everything like that. Is anyone having problems with the lag on the video or audio? Alright, so mostly seems like it's all good. Russell, if it's having issues, maybe if you can just come in or exit and then come back in, sometimes that will help too. All right. So the next part is we'll kind of just go down the left-hand side here of all the basic tools and shapes and features of CorelDRAW. So on the first one we have our pick tool. That's going to allow us to highlight and select designs and everything like that. When you have just a pick tool selected, if you left click and hold, you'll see you have a couple different options. The freehand pick is nice if you have multiple objects. So let's say I'll just draw a couple different things here. These ones green, and I'll move those here. So with the normal pick tool, if I wanted to just select or highlight, you know, select all the green, I can't necessarily do that because if I try to draw a box around everything, it's going to try to select, well, I may be able to do it that way, but if we move this one in a little bit. So if I try to just select the green objects, it's always going to kind of select that red one too. Now, in CorelDRAW, you can hold Control and select multiple objects at once. So by holding Control, Shift, I can, by holding Shift, you can select the multiple objects and it'll select them all. But we also have our freehand pick tool. So this will allow me to just go around the objects I want. So I'm left clicking and holding, and that way you can kind of get around different objects instead of, you know, if you have a lot, it might be hard to, you know, select shift and click on everything. So the freehand will let me just select or draw around the objects I want. So if I didn't want that one, I could come back in, and now I could just select those two. So that's going to be your freehand pick there. Most of the times we're going to usually stay in our pick tool, but if you have a lot of different objects and you kind of just want to select few of them, that's where the freehand pick's going to come in handy instead of just trying to draw a rectangle around everything that way. And one other little trick when, like, let's say I'm trying to, I'll go over a couple things real quick. So one thing is, in CorelDRAW, anyone that's new to it that might be coming over from like Silhouette or different design softwares, usually like in the Silhouette, when I start to draw, like if I want to select this object here and I draw a box over it, usually in Silhouette, like the minute my box hits the green shape that I'm trying to select, it knows I want to select that object, so it's selected. So if my box is only this big, it would still select my green box like I drew a box around the whole thing. Now in Corel, to select an object, if I don't draw my box around the whole thing, so you can see, like if I'm just miss that bottom edge, it won't select that object. So if I'm just missing like just the slightest piece of it, it won't select it. So you actually have to draw an entire box around that object you want to select for Corel to actually know you want to select that object. And that reminds me with the zoom too. So when we're working with the zoom in Corel, we have it in our mouse, the wheel on the mouse. If I want to zoom into a select object here, so let me make these all a little bit different colors. So if I want to zoom into my blue circle, if my mouse is way down here and I start to move that wheel forward, it's going to zoom in to where my mouse is. So if I want to zoom in on the green circle, I need to put my mouse on that object and then I can zoom towards it. So if you have something in the middle of your screen, but your mouse is way over here to the left and you just zoom forward, a lot of times it's like, where did my design go? Or why am I zooming in way over here when this is in the middle of my page? So you will need to keep that cursor wherever you want to zoom in towards. So if I want the blue objects, just keep it on that. If I want the magenta, I can put it over there. Yellow, there. So anytime we're using that zoom feature, we just need to make sure our mouse is you don't have to select the object, you just need to hover over that object. So underneath our pick tool, we have our shaping feature, our shaping tool. So the first one you'll see actually the word shape. What that does when you select an object like a rectangle here, it's not going to do it with necessarily every object, but you know, most of the basic shapes that Corel has and stuff, you'll be able to use this shape feature on it. And this simply just takes those corners and allows you to bring them in, and it just rounds them off just like that. So it can go all the way in to actually be a circle, or you can just round out the corners like that here. We had a question, does any of the Tier W designers use a pen tablet with Corel? Just curious. John, not really here. We've had customers use it before. And then we also have, I'm not sure what she uses. I'd have to check. I'd have to ask her, but we do have a designer that uses like one of those tablets as like a sketch pad first. And that kind of brings it in as an image though, not necessarily a vector design. And I'll go over that a little bit later with the trace features. So like anything you drew on it, you'd almost have to convert to a vector still. So I'll show you a little bit of that, but I'll check on her. I'll check what she uses too. I'm not exactly sure what tablet or device she has for that. So when we're working in CorelDRAW, when we're working with different tools and features, when we select that, like a certain tool feature, different options will show up on your toolbar up top here. So when I'm in the shape tool and I have a rectangle selected, you'll see that it gives me all these different options for like the scallop corner. I'm not going to even try to pronounce this word, but you have a lot of your different options here up top. So if I want different corner styles, I can choose that up top here. Now the minute I don't have that feature selected, you'll notice how that toolbar goes away. Hey Peggy, welcome. No problem. We're just getting going. So now I did go into the next tool, which is the smooth tool. So when I did that, you can see how the new toolbar for the smooth tool opens. So every time you open like different tools on the left hand side here, you'll see different toolbars open. So if you maybe saw something before and it's not there now, it's most likely just because the feature or object or tool you have selected doesn't have that same feature or has different ones, so they're not going to show up here. So these are all just your different shape features. We'll run through them just real quick, but most of them, maybe the smooth tool comes in handy sometimes when we have rough edges, maybe in a text or like a star shape, where you want to maybe make it just a little bit smoother so it's easier to cut and weed. That's where you can select your smooth tool. Up top here, you'll see the nib size, and that's just that circle that you see there. So that's the size of your circle. So if you want it a little bit bigger, you can just adjust that there, and you'll see how the circle changes. Next, you have the rate at which it affects the object. So you can kind of see here, we have some rough edges. So the speed's at 21. So once you select the object, if you left click and hold, you'll see how it just slowly starts to smooth out those edges. So the faster you have this set, the quicker it will start to shape or do whatever feature you want there. So this one, it's going to smooth it. So it's set to 100, so it's going to go pretty quickly there. So you just have a lot of different features here. This is a smear tool, so you can kind of get different looks like that. The twirl effect, this one's kind of cool, give you kind of like a wavy look like that. You can use this effect on like text and stuff like that. So let's say let's just say we had a basic text like this. Let's go to so you can take your twirl feature, maybe make it a little bit smaller. And you want to be careful with it. You don't go too much, because when we're working with like vectors, that's not too bad, but that would be pretty hard to weed with like a vector or like a glitter design or something like that. So we don't want to go to those extremes, but if we just want to add a little bit to our design, maybe a little swirl or something like that, make it look a little clumsy, you know, we can come in here and just give it like a nice little swirl, something like that. So just one way to use this tool. Hey Joseph, welcome. And then we have the attract and repel. That's kind of like your magnet effect. So when you hit attract, if you pull away from the object, you'll see how it does that. Again, you want to be careful when you're working, if you know you're going to work with vector designs, because something like this, we don't want to try to cut it or anything like that. So when we're using any of these features, just, you know, keep it, you know, kind of simple, where if you do too much like this, all of a sudden those cut lines are going to be really bad and it's going to leave you with a bad product. And then we have our smudge. Make this a little bit bigger. So that just kind of comes in it like that. So again, you're not going to use all these too much, and then the roughen, you can go around the edges. And we'll go a little bit bigger here. And it'll just roughen up those edges like that. So with the fonts, you know, these effects look pretty cool, or you can, you know, add to just a simple font. Maybe the shape tool you'll use just to kind of give you a different look with like a simple rectangle tool or something like that. But those are all your shape tools here, so you can kind of play around with them. But probably the shape, possibly the smooth, twirl, and roughen would probably be the most used. And just remember up top here, as you go through those different tools, you're going to get different toolbars up here. So just, you know, play around with it a bit. You can, again, this is going to be just kind of the speed at which it does the effect. So maybe start it out a little bit slower until you get the hang of it, and then, you know, you can speed that up if necessary. So the next is going to be our crop. We'll probably get into that a little bit later. Zoom, again, that's going to be mostly with your mouse. So the next tab down is going to be kind of your drawing tools. So this is going to be a little bit more of just preference. You're going to use your drawing tools probably when you're like tracing designs the most, or, you know, even sketching it freehand, stuff like that. But the one I use the most is going to be the B-spline, but you can kind of go through all of these and just kind of see which works best for you. The freehand is probably not going to work, because if you're trying to like trace this A, you can just see, and that when I'm tracing that, I'm just doing a left click and I'm holding that and just going across the top here. So you can see like how much your hand's going to kind of move. Just the slightest is not going to make that a very straight line. So the freehand's cool, but it's not going to really come in handy when we're designing, because it's going to look very sloppy with those lines. The 2-point line is just a left click and hold, and then you're just drawing kind of straight lines. So it's not the hardest. Like if you're tracing something like this, it wouldn't be too bad. But again, the B-spline is the one I use the most, and that's just kind of almost like you're tracing it. So every time you do a left click, it's going to leave one of those dots behind, and that's what we call a node. So it'll allow you to kind of trace, and you'll see the line the whole time. So you can make it, you know, depending on what you're tracing, you can make these traces look really nice using the B-spline. And as you're tracing, there's little features using this B-spline that around corners like this, like I'll use this as an example here. If I do a left click, and if I hold V as in vector, before I haven't done a left, so I did a first left click here, and then I'm moving it to the next point I want. But this is a sharp, you know, this is almost like a 90-degree right here. So this is a sharp angle. So if I want to get that nice, clean, sharp angle, I need to hold V as in vector before I left click, and that will give me a nice, clean, straight angle. Now up top here, you can see how my K starts to round out here in these points here. So once I get up top, I don't necessarily want a very clean angle. So I'm going to just trace it. Maybe up top there I can do it, but otherwise I'm just left clicking around the outside here, and by not holding V as in that V key on my keyboard, you can see the difference in these type of lines. So when we want a nice clean angle like this, I hold V and then left click. When I'm just doing a normal trace here and I want those curved lines, I just simply left click and it's going to follow that, you know, wherever I'm dropping those left clicks. So to start and stop a line, you just double click. So if I go back to my B-spline and I go to a point where I finished, I can actually start that line back up. So someone had a good question. Can we change the tracing line to see it better? So any of your palettes here on the right hand side, so this line right here, if you try to left click a color, it's not going to change the color of it. If you right click a color, it will actually change the color of that line. So this is just simply a line right now. It's not an object. So when you left click a color, it wants to fill the object, not the line. So same with this Lakewood design we have here. If I right click any of these colors, you'll notice how my outside edge is now that color. If I left click, my fill would be that color that I clicked. So you can do the same with your B-spline. Now when you're actually tracing the object, it's going to be that line just like that. When you stop and start the line, you can just right click any color you want. It'll change it to that color. But again, as you're like drawing that object, until you finish it or stop that line, it won't change that color. Right. So again, those are the two most art. The Bezier is pretty common too. That's a little bit harder for me, just because I'm used to the B-spline. But essentially, you're kind of, let me stop that line. You're kind of just clicking where you want your next spot to be. So it's really not too bad. But I started with the B-spline, so I'm kind of used to that. But you can definitely use this one too, and it's pretty good, pretty quick for beginners. So if that one's easier to use, feel free to use that or the Bezier tool. That one, you're just simply left clicking around the edges or like where you want your next point to be, and it will simply follow that line. And if you do a left click and hold, you can make those edges rounded. So if we got it to a point like this and I needed that to be rounded, I can do a left click and hold and kind of make that a little bit more rounded. So if you're doing straight lines, it might be a little bit quicker to use the Bezier tool. If you're doing all these, curved edges or anything like that, I'd probably just stick with the B-spline. Alright, so next we get into kind of our different shapes. So you have your rectangle. Again, up top here, you'll have your different options for it. When we're working in Corel, we have like Shift and Control will sometimes be like little extra keys for different shapes or objects or features. So if you're holding Control while you draw any shape, it'll make it a perfect shape. So it'll make a rectangle a perfect square. So you don't have to kind of sit there and try to get the measurements perfect or anything like that. By holding Control, it'd make that square perfect for you every time. And if you want to adjust the edges or anything like that, you have your different options up here, and then you can just hit up or down, and you'll see how it starts to affect our corners there. So it's pretty much like the shape tool, you're just changing the effects manually up here instead. So pretty much same with the circle. To make it a perfect circle, you'll just hold Control. So those are both there. And then under the polygon tool, if you left click and hold, you'll see all the different shapes you have there. Yeah, so we actually had a good question. Can you change one corner on the rectangle and not the other? So yes, you can, and I should have pointed that out before. So if you go to the shape tool, if you left click and hold any of these corners, whatever you do to one, it will do to all four, so it kind of makes it all even. If you hold control and you select a corner, you'll just change the effect of that corner. So if you don't want, if you don't care for it to be all nice and even, you can hold control and it'll just affect one corner at a time. So great question. So when you left click and hold under your polygon, you'll see all the different basic shapes, and kind of you have your arrow, flowchart, banner, and call shapes. So these are actually useful when we're designing. So on your polygon, you'll see up top here how you have your points or sides. So when you're drawing your shapes, like if you want different shapes or anything like that, you can change how those are affected here. Same with like your star and stuff like that. So if we want maybe a 4 or 3-sided star, you can adjust that here. You can adjust the sharpness of the points. So if you want it less, you'll make that number go down. If you want it more, you can do that. So with the different star shapes, you can make it look completely different. So those will, you'll see a lot of little stars and stuff in some of our designs. So those are definitely going to come in handy. Under basic shapes, those, again, when you click on that, you'll see your toolbar up here change. So right now it has the heart selected. It's most likely going to look like that the first time you open up your basic shapes. And then any option you choose, it's just going to go to your last chosen item up there. So when you left click, this is just going to drop this down, and here are all your basic shapes. So you're probably not going to use too many of these in here, except probably like the heart, maybe like the no sign, if that's what you want to call it. But everything else is pretty basic, and maybe the lightning bolt if you needed to. But the heart's probably the most used shape that you'll use out of the basic shapes. And then arrows, again, those are all in here if you need them. They might come in handy while designing, but you'll definitely use, probably not so much the flowchart, but the banner shapes. A lot of our designs, you'll see us use the banner shapes. So you just left click and hold, and while you're holding, you can control the entire size and kind of shape of your banner. So again, if you hold control while you're doing this, it's going to make it a perfect, what they think is the perfect banner shape. So it might not be to your specs, but that's what it's going to look like here. But you can kind of change that and see the different styles and stuff you have there. Same with the call out. You probably won't use too many of those, but they are available if you need them. So those are all going to be under your basic shapes. So the next one we're going to get into is the text tool. So when we're, designing can be really simple. If we just want a simple design that just is straight text, we can kind of start that right away. You don't even need pretty much additional software or anything like that. You can just type it out, convert it to curves or weld it, whatever's necessary, and send it right over to your cutter. So there's using the text tool is kind of where we see a lot of issues, or people starting out, we see a lot of problems, or they try to set up their own design and they run into some problems, and it's mostly related to the text tool. So one of the biggest errors I see is when we select this text tool, we like to draw a box with it. So we just kind of think like this is going to be where our design is going to be, and we just draw a box and we just start typing, you know, whatever we want in our design. So now when we do that, I can't just simply now drag this out and make it bigger. It's just going to make that box bigger. So when we use the text tool, what we actually want to do is just start, if we want to just start with the text, just to write out, you know, the word Lakewood Mustangs like we have here. Instead of drawing this box, we're simply going to select the text tool, left click. You'll see your little kind of text marker there. And now you can just simply just start typing whatever you want. So you'll do Lakewood. And if you want to hit enter, you can do Mustangs underneath, or you can just make it all on one line. So to change everything in here, I would have to come in here and then select my text size, and let's say I make it 200, and now half of my design's gone. And that's because my paragraph box isn't big enough, so it won't show everything. So we don't want to design this way. It makes it way too complicated. So we're going to get rid of that paragraph box there. So now if I want to make this bigger, I can simply just drag out, and now I can see it. Now up top here is going to be your object size. So right now we're sized to almost 20 inches wide. That's probably not how big we want our design, but since it's a vector, I can make it, you know, I can eventually make it smaller or whatever size we want, but this allows me to see it a little bit better when I blow it up like that. So when we resize text like that, if you notice what I did here is when you click on your text, you're going to see all these kind of squares around the outside of it. And that just allows you to grab your object however you want. So you can grab it from the bottom square here, and if you do that, it's just going to stretch it that way. You can grab it from any of the sides too, and it's going to stretch it from the side. Or you can grab one of the diagonal corners, or the corners of it, and you can pull diagonally. And what that does, when you pull it that way, it always keeps your design and text proportionate to the height and width. So if you pull it from the bottom, then you're kind of pulling out the side, and then the top side again, and you're trying to make it look nice, which is possible, but usually we just want to take it and just drag straight from the corner, and that keeps the text the same height and width that it should be set to. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and change that, and let's do it so it's not all capital letters. So one of the next issues, and actually we'll just do Lakewood. We don't need two text fields. So one of the next issues or questions we get a lot with text is the difference between converting to curves and welding a design or welding a text. So anytime we're working with a text like this, that I picked this font on purpose. This is kind of like a script font, and the letters go into each other. So the L goes into the A into the K into the E, and so on. Now, when we're working with a design like this, before we send it to the cutter, you'll hear it a lot. We'll say you need to convert it to curves or you need to weld your design. So what that does is allows your cutter or your software, because this is important with some of the cut softwares, is if you save this as a font, it sometimes won't load or read into the cutting program, like Great Cuts, GCC cutters. If using their Great Cuts program, if you did a drag and drop with your text and you left it as a text, not an object, the cutter won't be able to read it. So on some it is important, and you will need to actually convert it to a curve or weld it before you send it over. So I'm going to go to the wireframe, and just so you know how to find that, just using Corel, if you go to View, you'll see the option wireframe. It's the second one down. That's going to allow us to see pretty much what our cutter would read if we were to send it over as is. So where all those letters connect, you'll see these little areas like that. So those are actually overlapped. So all these little pieces would actually, when we cut that, we would run into the chance of weeding those out. Or when you like, if we left it as is, you'll see when you press it, you'll see all these little cut marks that look like they weren't weeded correctly or something like that. So it doesn't look good as on the finished product. So we need to kind of clean that up before we ever send it over to the cutter. So to convert something to curves, there's a couple different ways you can do it. One would be going to Object, and then under there you'll see Convert to Curves. Next to that here, you'll see the shortcut is Control Q. So that's going to just be, anytime you see these little like Control Shift Q, Control K, those are your shortcut keys for those different, functions or tools or anything like that. So sometimes, a lot of times when I convert it, I'll just use the shortcut Control Q. Now, this is a tool that you'll probably use a lot. So obviously you're not going to remember all these shortcuts right off the bat, but that's one that you'll probably learn pretty quickly. So you have the option of hitting, coming here, hitting Convert to Curves, doing Control Q, or you can actually right click your object. You'll have that same option here, Convert to Curves. And then also, which technically we're not really covering it today, is the Design Wizard. If you have that, we have our own TRW toolbar, and we have the Convert to Curves button there too, just as like kind of like a shortcut key as well. So there's multiple ways you can convert an object to curves. So I'm going to hit the shortcut, so I'm going to hit Control Q. And what that, right now, before I hit that, if I click into Lakewood, you'll notice I can still come in here and type the word Mustangs if I wanted. So that's one of the big differences. And also, if I left click and drag this, you'll see how you pretty much just see it as it is. So I'm going to make a copy here, and I'm going to hit Control Q. So now when I drag this around here, you notice how you see the blue lines now, instead of like just a filled, like just kind of what we see here where it's the Mustangs. It doesn't show us those blue lines or anything like that. It just shows the Mustangs text. And you can notice how it has all these little boxes underneath our letters here. Those are indications that that this is still a font. So it's not, we can still edit this. It's not an object or cutter. We still need to convert this to an object. So those are just little things. And if I click in here, I can still change it. Well, now if I move this around, you'll see the blue lines. Those are the cut lines that essentially your cutter would read. So when you see something like that with an object, that means that this is converted to a vectorized object, and you can now send this over to your cutter. All right, so when I move this around, no blue lines. You see the text boxes underneath, and if I click into it, I can still edit the text. This one, if I click into it, you see all the nodes. And again, those blue dots around here, those are all the nodes. So you can actually come through here, and let's say I wanted the T a little bit taller. I could highlight that section of nodes, lift it up, and I could make that T taller if I wanted to. So with these nodes, you can add them by double clicking on an object, and then I could like pull that way out here. I can, completely control the shape of that if I, want it to look like that. You can also delete the nodes by just double clicking on them. Now, some will have bigger impacts than others, so you can kind of see how that's shaping now. Be careful when you're deleting it. You can like highlight and delete by sections, but just know that, sometimes it might just give it a weird look when you do stuff like that. So you have complete control of all the nodes once you convert that object or once you convert that text to an object. So we had a couple questions. Blue lines give unwanted cuts at the cutter. Yeah, so I'm not sure what you mean here, but right now we don't want to send this through just because of how it's set up, if that's what you're saying. And then, will there be a TRW training for? Yeah, so the TRW new users is going to come next. So either it'll probably be next week. We'll do the new to the wizard, the most frequently used tools, setting up your live templates. We'll go through all that as well. So anyone that's new to it, I know we had a couple people from Charlotte here, so we'll definitely cover those most used tools and setting up everything like that. All right, so the difference on this design right now is we need to fix it because we have these bad cut lines. So if I go to my wireframe, we have these issues where we have overlapping pieces. Now, it is converted to curves, but it's not welded yet. And anytime we're working with an object, whether or a font that might be a script font, something like this, or an object that is going to be like the same color that are overlapping, we always want to weld that. So under object again, you'll have this shaping option. So the top one will be weld. Again, there's a couple different ways to find that. It's not going to be a right click like the last one, but you can, up here on your TRW toolbar, if you have that, you'll have your weld feature. And then also, and you'll see once you click weld, how all those are just one continuous piece. So we went from that to a weld, and it's just all one nice piece. So we just had a question come into why do you convert to curves and weld? So you don't actually need to do both. And that's what I was going to kind of eventually get to is when you convert an object to curves, if there's no overlapping pieces, you don't necessarily need to weld it. But if you're using like any type of script font, you want to or anything that's like overlapping, you always want to weld it. That way, by welding something, you're automatically converting it to curves. So most of the fonts, like if you had the same text, can't type today. So let's say I had this Mustangs here, and I just had a basic bold font like this. So this is still a font right now. You can see I can still type it, go into it and change it. So right now this font here, if I wanted to send it to my cutter, I could just do Control Q, which would be a convert to curves. And that's good to go. Because none of it's overlapping, so it doesn't necessarily have to be welded together. But when you're using a design like this, where you have overlapping pieces, if you just simply convert to curves, that's where we have those overlapping pieces still. So in this case, we wouldn't even need to right click and hit convert to curves. We would just go straight to the weld option. And by clicking weld, it's going to make all this one continuous piece, and it's going to convert that object from a text, or it's going to convert that text to an object. Yeah, so we had a couple, it's converting curves better than converting to a bitmap. Yeah, so converting to a bitmap is taking a design or an object and converting it into like an image. So we don't, in most cases, we don't ever really want to convert to a bitmap. Because that takes a file that you can send to your cutter to a file that you can no longer send to your cutter by converting it to a bitmap. And then, so you basically want to convert to curves for some cutters and read objects and not necessarily fonts. Yeah. So if for some reason, like let's say, and let me see, I might have it. So I'm going to open up Great Cuts, which is the software for GCC cutters. So on this one, so this Mustang is still a font. So if you drag and drop, see how it just, nothing comes up in my file here? Yeah, it might be different for like the silhouette and stuff like that. Now, even if your cutter can read or like a text before you weld it or convert it to curves, if you send a font like a script font like this over to any cutter before welding it, it's gonna cut every line like that. So it's still gonna give you a bad cut. So even if your cutter can read a design like a font without converting it, you still want to, if it's script, you still want to hit that weld option because it's going to make it one continuous piece. But now that I've welded this together, if I drag and drop this, it drops it right in. So that's just one instance where, you know, you'd actually have to convert it or weld it. But you just want to get in the habit of, you know, I just want to show you the difference between converting a text and welding it. So converting it and welding it both turn it into an object, but converting it doesn't necessarily weld it where you get this nice clean lines. This toolbar here is the same weld button, so it doesn't matter. It's all going to just be the same. You don't need to, you know, there's no difference between our weld and Corel's or anything like it. It's the same button. All right, so since we have our text here still, we're going to go, before we finish the rest of the tools, and actually these ones we won't use too much down here anyway, so the only ones we'll probably use when we're designing is going to be this Smart Fill. And if you don't see any of these like tools that I'm looking at here, and you have two little arrows at the bottom like below it, if you left click that, you should see the rest of your tools there. So here we have the Smart Fill, and this is a pretty cool fill feature. Like if, let's say we had a design like this and I just maybe wanted, or one good example is, let's say I wanted every other letter a different color, or like it would just alternate colors through my design. Well, if I don't have the wizard, that's actually kind of a harder setup to do with like a text like this. I would have to break my curve apart, which like on any letter like this A here, it would fill that top, or fill that object here where the A was. So if I make it a different color and move it to the back layer, I would then have to take this layer here, hold shift, and then hit back minus front, and that would subtract it through again. So then I could go through here and change, you know, every letter to whatever I wanted. But if I didn't want to go that route, I could just simply hit the Smart Fill tool, click on each letter, and it's going to fill that object. And then I can just select every other one, and then change that real quick. And then I could just get rid of or delete, you know, whatever I wanted to with my original one here. So the Smart Fill will come in handy for stuff like that. Also sometimes like we got a couple like more advanced webinars where like we use magic patterns, and you can subtract like patterns and stuff using that feature. So that's a little bit more advanced, but we have those we have those available too, just to kind of show what else you can do with that Smart Fill tool. How do you keep the letters from closing in again? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Are you saying by instead of having? Okay, yeah. So that's using the Smart Fill here. So instead of right clicking and hitting Break Curve Apart, where you get the A filled in here, if you use the Smart Fill tool and just click this inside the object. Now, notice if I click on the outside of any, like if I just click out in the open here, see how it fills my entire design? That's just kind of like an error using the Smart Fill. If you click into an open area, it completely just fills your entire, like whatever's on your workspace or whatever's like in your design area, it would fill. So even if I had like a bunch of random circles out here and I use the Smart Fill, it would just fill every object like that. So we don't necessarily want that. So we want to come in here and click on each letter. But again, if you were to miss just by the slightest, it's going to fill everything. So you just hit undo, and up top here, you have your undo button, or a lot of times like you'll hear it clicking for me and Matt. It's just Control Z is the shortcut for that. So if you ever watch this like at a show or maybe during Matt's like lives, he pretty much will always, if you look at his left hand, a lot of times just on the bottom left, because that's Control Z. So, you know, when you're designing and stuff like that, sometimes you'll just need to move an object real quick, and that's Control Z to go right back. So if you want to like, okay, I want to select these two, but I want to make sure I have them selected. So you can just kind of pull them down and then Control Z, and then I know I have those two selected. To move layers, like, so let's say I wanted to, like when I filled this one in here and I wanted to move this to the back layer, if you right click, you'll see this order, and these are all the shortcuts again on the right. So if I want to move this to the back of page, I just hit that there. If I want to move this maybe behind, you know, to the front or back, you can, it gives you all your options here. So a lot of times too, you'll see us using the shortcuts for that, because to move it to the back, you just hit Control N and it moves that to the back layer, and you know, it makes it pretty simple. Again, we do have that feature on the wizard too. It's just a key that says F and B, so it's just front and back, so you can easily move it that way too. But this, like if you're designing with multiple layers, you'll also see the option here where it says like to front a layer or forward one, back one. So we don't have that specific on the wizard. You're either going to move it all the way to the front layer or all the way to the back. All right, so one tool you'll see us use a lot when we like are shaping text or different objects is the envelope feature. And that's going to be under your effects. You'll see the word envelope. And when you click on that, it's going to open up a little box here. So we had a good question. What determines a layer? Really, it could be like every time you make a new object, it puts it on a different layer. So most times when you have multiple, like each object is on its own layer. So if I make, like let's say I make a copy of this circle, that moved it to the layer above it. So it's every time you have like every time you pretty much make a new object, it puts it on a higher layer. Like when you make a copy or something like that of it, like if I were to bring in a rectangle, it's just going to keep bringing it to the new, like a layer above it, above it, above it. So most of the time when we're designing, in the end, it's not like the way we're cutting with like vector designs and stuff like that, the layers aren't that big of a deal, because everything's kind of gonna be cut by color, so it's not like by layer or anything like that. But if we were like designing with maybe like more print to cut or sublimation, stuff like that, the layers would matter a little bit, because obviously like if we had a circle like this and we wanted to blue out the light blue outline around it, we definitely have to make sure that it's layered correctly that way. So yeah, under here, so you said you were using the object manager. Yeah, so if you hit the plus here, and it just might be doing something like that, and this is under your, you can find your different layers or different your object manager and stuff under here. But anytime you have like the envelope or anything open already, if you hit this plus, it will show you all your little Docker windows here. So that's how I quickly got to the object manager. And for anyone that might be coming from like Illustrator or something like that, I know a lot of our like graphic designers work with Illustrator, and the layers and everything like that are super important. Not so much for what we're kind of doing, but if you'll see your page 1 here. So if you hit this plus, you'll see all the different objects on your layer here. So you can kind of move those around. You can group them. You can do stuff with them here. But it might just be hitting that plus sign to see all your different ones. I'm not sure. But I don't tend to use the object manager when I'm like moving stuff around in here. When it comes to like vector designs and stuff like that, I can just simply, if I want this on the top, I'll just hit order to the front of page, or wherever I need it. And getting in here too, you can like lock objects and stuff like that. If you click on this eye, it will like make everything on that layer disappear. Now technically it's still there, but you can't see it. You can lock objects, so now I can't grab anything. So maybe like when you're designing around something, this might be a little bit useful in this case, where like, let's say, so I locked everything, but if you had just something on layer 1, you could, just lock layer 1 and then it wouldn't move or anything like that. But again, for the most part, like if I didn't want this Mustangs to move, I could just right click, hit lock object, and that won't, like if I click on it or anything like now, it will just say it's locked and it won't move. All right, so the envelope tool allows us to shape like our text, and once we get into the wizard, you'll see some of the text effects tools, and we can also create our own text effects, shapes, and stuff like that. And that's all going to be done using the envelope feature. So let's just pretend like this is back to just a one color design. Make it a little bit easier. If for some reason you ever had multiple objects, like let's say I had both of like my font like this, and I wanted to shape both of them, you would need to group both of them at the same time. You'll notice if you select 2 objects and they're not grouped, see how my envelope, add new, add preset, it's all grayed out. And that's a good point too with really any feature on the software like this. If it's grayed out, it means that you cannot execute that like button. So whatever you have selected, or you might need to select something else to make those pop up here. So right now you can see how my ungroup all options are grayed out. Well, that's because my objects aren't grouped, so there's nothing to ungroup. So I can't use this button here. And that's the same thing here too. Once I select two objects, you'll notice how all these toolbars open here too. So because I have two objects selected, it now gives me the weld option. So maybe I want to weld these together. I have the trim option if I want to trim it. I have intersect. I have all these different options that once I have two things selected, it now gives me. So right now the envelope isn't it's grayed out, so I know I can't use this feature. So the reason why is because I have two objects selected. If I were to just have one, it would be fine. You'll see how it says add new and add preset. It's a clickable button now. So if I want to shape two objects at the same time, you just need to group them together. And again, right click, group objects, or you'll see the Control G is the shortcut. So that's another one that even if you're pretty new to it, that Control G shortcut, it's going to save a lot of time. So next we have our different options here. So we'll start with the straight line and we're going to click add new. So once we select add new, you're going to see they're going to look like nodes pretty much. They're a little bit different. These are the boxes and circles around our design here now are going to allow us to click on them, left click and drag, and that's going to let us shape our text. So since we have both of them grouped together, it's going to shape them together the same way. And I can pull on these different points and it will completely change the shape of my text like that. So the first couple options we have, the straight, the single arc, and the double arc, all we pretty much have control over is like moving these up and down to the left, to the right. Same with these ones here. And that's one thing too. You'll notice as soon as I move this one over to the left, if you see a design like this, it's not going to cut. You know, this isn't, if it doesn't look good, it's probably not going to cut well either. So when we're creating these envelope shapes, we still have to kind of still be a little careful with them that we don't go too much or too crazy with them, just because we need our design most likely still to be a cuttable vector file. So we don't want to get cut lines all twisted up and stuff. So we want to watch what we do a little bit with these, but you know, something like this would be fine. It's just once I pull this way out here, you know, this would be almost impossible to try to cut. So let's go back here, and the next one we're going to do is the single arc. All right, so this one's going to allow us to get kind of more of that rounded look. So it's going to do the same thing where we can only pull, you know, you can pull from the sides and stuff like that. Pull out the bottom. And this is going to be more rounded instead of that straight line look. We got a question. Can you put a margin around the group design to give it more space for the envelope? Carol, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Can you put a margin? What do you mean by margin? No, like when you pull out like here and stuff. No, so you'll just have to manually control that. So that's why you want to be a little bit careful with it. It's kind of just one of those things that you're gonna, you know, if you want to pull it out from the sides, you're just gonna have to slowly pull it out and make sure it still looks good as you go. Now, with these envelopes, like I said earlier, and let's actually go here. I'm going to ungroup this, and we're just going to do a one color, just so we can see it a little bit better. So I'm going to go to add new, And just like I was saying earlier, Shift and Control will allow us to do kind of special features with some tools. And the envelope is one of those. So using the single arc method, I'm going to pull up the bottom. And as I pull that up, I'm going to hold the Control. So by holding Control, as I pull this up, it's going to bring the top up with it. So it's just going to pretty much mirror. So if I pull this down, it's going to pull the top down. And that's how you can get different arcs like that. Shift is going to do the opposite. So if I have this here, and I go, if I hold Shift, as I pull down, the top's going to go up. So you can get different, you can get the squeeze look like that. Or you can kind of get almost like the exploded look like that. So let's say I have a design, and let's go back to something like that. So right now I have this design. If I left click on it again, it's just gonna allow, or it's just gonna show you this box around it. So this is in an envelope shape now, so I can't really do much to it except control, you know, the envelope and how it looks that way. Can you numerically control the arc when you're in the envelope mode? I don't think so. What do you like? Do you mean just like slowly hit like almost like the contour where you can control it that way? Like, let me just go to the contour option real quick. Like, do you mean how it has like a contour offset where you can kind of control it like that? Gotcha. All right, Russell, you have a great night. Thanks for coming. No numbers. No, so with the envelope, you won't be able to. The only way to really control the envelope is by selecting those nodes that are around it and controlling it this way. So there's no like number system or, you know, up or down that will control it. All right. So let's say I have, this is the next issue we run into with envelopes a lot. Let's say I want to add a new envelope to this design, or let's say I want to reshape it. You know, they don't really like the squeeze look. They like how the bottom comes up, but they only want the top to look like this. All right, so when we have this look already in an envelope setting like this, the biggest thing that we see error-wise with the envelopes is you already have an envelope applied, and then you come in and you go add new. So the issue with this is you can still control your design, but let me go back actually one. So I'm going to make a copy. So I'm going to hit add new to this one. And on this one, well, let me select both of them at once. So here, because we already have an envelope applied to it, you can see how the lines follow the shape of our design already. So where my arc is where my letters pretty much follow that line, right? You guys see that on this one here? So once I select this Mustangs over here and hit add new, you'll notice how now my lines go to the outside. It's just a rectangle box around my design. So when I pull this up, I have no idea where this line is actually going to stop now, or start, or kind of be shaped. So it's kind of like a guessing game now where, okay, I have to pull this way up here to get the arc here, where on this design, wherever I have that line, that's where my text is going to be. So anytime you already have a text in an envelope, you don't have to hit add new. Even if you want to switch it from a arced to a straight line, you can still come in here, change the shape, and now it's going to be a straight line on that bottom part. So you can use different envelopes in the same like core envelope. You can add different effects to it, but you don't ever want to hit add new to some design, font, or object that you've already applied an envelope to. All right. So any questions with the envelopes? So I think we're going to end up doing, I think this is a good probably stopping point here before we get too much into anything else. What we'll do is probably do we'll definitely do a part 2 of the Corel basics. And I'll definitely hit more of like the tracing features and stuff like that. And then again, next week, we'll get into the webinar or the wizard, you know, kind of starting out new to that too. And we got a little question coming first. When you add or when you make an envelope, can you add it to new wording? So that's a good question. And yes, you can. You can do that in a sense. It's a little harder without the software. You can pretty much make a live text. So like the word Mustang right now, if you've ever seen like our software with the live text, that's kind of what we were creating here. So if I went to my text tool here and I clicked on the word Mustangs now, is this already an object? Okay. So let me go back, rewrite this. And this is, I mean, that's a great question. That's kind of what we do for our live text. And inside the software, we have a way of already creating like text effects and stuff. So it makes it super easy to do it in that. But if you wanted to, like, let's say you had the word Mustangs here and you added an envelope, you shaped it like this. Well, once you add an envelope to a text like this, you're kind of making it a live text in the sense that you can now select your text tool, click on the word Mustangs, and I didn't center it or anything like that right now, so those steps are actually important. But just using the word Mustangs right now, let's say I went to USA, and this is why I'm choosing this. See how, and let me make a copy of that just so it's easier to see. So because I created that envelope shape, anything I type in here will hold to that shape. But the word Mustangs is 8 characters and USA is only 3. So it's only filling to that point of 3 characters. And that's kind of because of how I set it up with just the word Mustangs. There's actually a very old way of us setting up our live text. And it starts with us using 3 eyes, centering that text, and then just using like a basic font like impact. Had a script font selected, so it wasn't showing impact. So this is an impact, just 3 eyes with the impact font, and I centered it up here. So when you make your envelope now using these 3 eyes, I know it looks like kind of just 3 pillars, but if you shape this design now, this is set up as like a live text. So it doesn't, because we only use 3 letters to start out with. Now if I come in here and type USA, it's going to look good. And I can go type the word Mustangs, and it's still going to hold to that shape and format. So you can set up like templates like this, kind of like you're asking for the live text. But you can actually, in the software, it has pre-made shapes for you, and you can add your own shapes to it. So once you know, if there's a style that you use a lot, or, you know, an envelope, how, like a banner shape or something like that, that you have a banner for that you want to fit text into, that's something you can do with the Wizard software a lot easier. So great question. Can the envelope be like animal shapes or like elaborate shapes like that? Not necessarily. That's where you get into. That's where you get into like really messed up, like pieces where I stretched it like that. You have to be super careful, depending on the shape of the object you're trying to fill it to and whatnot, to make sure it's like one, legible, two, to be able to cut and everything like that. So it's not like something where you can simply just select any shape you want and create an envelope for it. There's a little work involved in something like that. Now, under add, or next to add new, we do have that add preset, and this is kind of a good example of it. Let me make this actually like Mustangs again. So you'll see in the presets here, there's a lot of different shapes, even like a heart, little star, stuff like that, Christmas tree. But in no way does that mean you can simply select that shape, hit apply, because that's what my text looks like now. Yeah, so you can't add your own to the Corel, but you can add your own shapes to the Wizard. Yeah, so some of the, and yeah, this is just Corel training. So some of these features that we're kind of covering tonight are going to be 10 times easier in the software. It's kind of just, tonight is just kind of going through the basics, and you know, you might just need to use the envelope feature to create like your own text boxes or envelope shapes or text shapes and stuff like that. So we'll go over the basics, and that's definitely going to help build your foundation to designing. But a lot of the tools that Corel has, the whole point of the Wizard is to make everything, you know, easier, quicker, one button click, stuff like that. So yeah, it's gonna, the Wizard and stuff, especially when it comes to the live text and the different shapes, it's gonna make it easier on you. But just knowing how, you know, just knowing how to get to that if you needed to is good to know, and just knowing like what an envelope is, how to control it, how to shape it, you know, those are still important, because you can take, you know, a basic envelope preset that we might have and you can add to it. So knowing how to do that is important, and just knowing like the basic shapes, how they work, everything like that. So that kind of stuff, you know, the Wizard won't be able to do, but you know, when it comes to live text, creating it, adding shapes, it's going to make it a lot easier. And even something as simple as like when I came here and we used how we had the button that broke it apart, but when we did that, it filled in like the A. Well, on the Wizard, there's a quick button that keeps it in the font, keeps it as a font, but will break it apart. So this B here is the break apart tool, but instead of filling in those areas with the A, it doesn't do that, but it does allow you to individually select each letter to give it like a cool look like that. So again, that's a one-click button in the Wizard, where here, if I don't have the software, you know, I'm coming through and filling each one with the Smart Fill tool, or I'm breaking it apart and then, you know, trying to get it back to that look. So there's definitely going to be a lot of features that are going to be a little bit easier in the software, but just kind of knowing the basics of Corel is important, just for when it comes to, you know, designing and kind of building upon that. but we'll definitely cover tracing. I'm gonna try to set up the part 2 for either. I'm gonna try for later in this week. We just have a open house. This, by the way, we do have an open house this Saturday. So if you're local or pretty close, anything like that, or just want to make the trip down, that's gonna be Saturday. We're gonna have classes, barbecue, some sidewalk sales, probably some cornhole games like that. So if you're in the area, I would definitely recommend coming by and checking that out. But my schedule's a little bit off just because of that this week. But if I can, I'm going to try to fit one in like Thursday, maybe midday, kind of like Matt did today, or possibly that night. So we'll try to aim for Thursday for part 2. If not, we'll do it again next week. And yeah, someone asked earlier too about, is it always on this day? For the most part, I try to do a webinar on Tuesday nights. But it's not as like, Matt's lives are always Mondays. It's not as like dialed in as that. But for the most part, probably on Tuesdays, we'll either have some type of free or premium webinar. So, but as soon as I know part 2, I'll send out that email plus, I'll put it up on Facebook. So anyone that's new to the webinars, we will upload the recorded version. So underneath your file, if you just got this link from our Facebook page where it just had like shot you straight to the registration link, you can do 2 things. You can go to the website. It's a free free purchase, but you can actually purchase the webinar, but it's $0. And as soon as the recorded version's ready, I'll put the upload file there for the YouTube link. Or you can just kind of wait and go to YouTube within 48 hours and it will be up there on YouTube. But if you want the actual link straight to it, you'll actually have to go put in your cart, check out, and then I'll drop the files right underneath there. So right now, if you were to go purchase it, it's just going to have the registration link to get to where you are now, but it's going to say something like it's over. So once it's up on YouTube, I'll change that link, and it'll be, instead of being a link to this, it'd be the link right to the YouTube video. So any webinar going forward, you'll always have access to the recording. Usually, if it's like a premium one like Matt had today, you'll also get like the download files that are created in there too. So even if it's a premium, the amount of like downloads and stuff you get pretty much make it worth the 10 or 15 bucks, whatever it is. So but yeah, if you guys have any additional questions, please give us a call at 941-755-1696 or shoot us an email at info@therhinestoneworld.com. Thank you guys so much again. Carol, I hear you do great barbecue. Have fun Saturday. Well, I appreciate that, and good luck recovering, everything like that. Hope your knee's all right. All the way from Cali, yeah. That'd be a long trip, but yeah, this is a little bit different. Yeah, so someone asked, this is different from the in-house training. The in-house is more of like, a 3-day event. This is just open house, just quick classes. I think we have like 5 throughout the day. Not something you're going to like bring your laptop to. It's more of just kind of listening, follow along, getting ideas and stuff like that. But the in-houses, those are the 3-day events where you're sitting there with your laptop, you're pressing, you're learning, hands-on, everything like that. So but this is a little bit more fun, a little more relaxed. You'll get to meet the crew, eat some food, and hopefully learn a few things. Do you have an in-house schedule yet? I do not believe so. Carol, if you shoot me an email, I'll find that out for you and let you know. I know it's something that is like getting done. I don't know if they've actually come up with all the dates yet. Let me see if I can pull it up on our website and see if it's there yet. Okay, so yeah, we do have a couple dates. So we got February 26th to the 28th, July 22nd. They put July 22nd through July 24th, October 14th through October 16th. So those are the 3 we have right now. So those are up as well. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. Like I said, any questions, just let us know. I'll get the recorded version up. We say 48 hours, but it should be up by tomorrow. And then once I know my schedule for sure, Thursday I'll probably list that part 2 of Corel. And then next Tuesday we'll start getting into the basics of the wizard and stuff like that. So anytime too, if you guys want to see anything in particular, just shoot us an email. We're always looking for ideas for the webinar. So if you run into any problems, anything like that, just let us know, and we can do quick videos or full webinars depending on the issue. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much, and have a great rest of the night and a good weekend if we don't see each other before then.